bakers are very, very lucky people. We happen to have chosen a profession that enables us to give both pleasure and nourishment to our community, and that's really nice. It's a good feeling. When you're done with the day, you take off your apron and you say, yep, that was a good bake. I'll be back tomorrow. Or you say, well, that was a mediocre bake. Thank God I'll be back tomorrow. So here's our baked baguettes. We have some baked rolls and some baked batar. And we want to look at the exterior to see if it meets our quality criteria. And this one definitely does. There's a lot of things about it that really are good. The symmetry is great. This gligne or ear that Martin got into it when he cut it is just right. And the bake is really beautiful. You can see there's this nice bold line. It's a little darker up here. It's not going to taste bitter in your mouth, but it gives it a nice visual effect. There's a nice soft but even coating of flour on the outside that can be appealing. It can be a bit of an affectation, but in this case, since we proof our loaves with the seams up, we do so on a little bit of flour, and so this is going to get embedded in the loaf. If you have an excess of it, it's going to be a little bit unpleasant in your mouth. But this has all the characteristics that we're looking for in a well-shaped batar or oval loaf. You can see that Martin started with the razor blade at this end, and he went all the way to that end. A lot of times people, when they're starting out, they stop here, or one end is here and the other end doesn't quite make it, or the angle of the blade changes, in which case the bread doesn't blossom open the way it does here. It'll be, in certain parts, it'll be beautiful like this, and then if simply the angle of the cut is incorrect, the bottom portion might be really, really dense and much less volume. So this meets all the quality criteria that we would want. The bottom has a darkness to it, but this too is not going to represent any kind of bitterness in your mouth. So this should have good full flavor. That's what we like. Baguettes, these are also great. You can see that the cuts are symmetrical. We can pick the loaf up by its ears. This used to be a sign that the old apprentice boys had to do in France to show the master that they had handled the cutting correctly. It also is an indication that the mixing was good, the shaping was good, the final proofing was good, the temperature of the oven was good, all those things. Then the angle of the cut, the length of the cut, the depth of the cut were all appropriate for that particular loaf. Generally, when you work with a few bakers, you get to know each other's style. Certainly when we were loading the breads earlier, Martin and I were loading the baguettes, we each knew which ones had been shaped by each of us because we know each other's style. It's kind of a signature. Same with the cut. I know that Martin's last cut is always a little longer than the other four, and you can see that here. So I would know in a flash that, yep, Martin cut this one. That's his signature. So we're not talking about defects, we're talking about characteristics.
Don't steal that.
Here too, a nice robust bake. There's going to be really, really good flavor in this loaf of bread. Here's the last test for it. First thing we want to see is a lot of crumbs on the table. That's a good sign that there's a good crispiness to the crust. And then when we open it up, I'm being met with a lot of fragrance right here. And as for that, we were stressing earlier the importance of keeping some of the gases in the baguette so that we get a nice open cell structure the way that is here. We could strive for even a little bit more open than we have, but this is quite acceptable. Oftentimes you'll see it a little bit denser at the edges. That's usually the way that the final seam is being made. Might be compressing a little bit too much of the bread, and certainly in a bread competition, which clearly we weren't doing today, judges would be on the lookout to see if there's a little bit of extra thickness here. That would be an indication that the bread wasn't handled with quite the amount of delicacy that it could have been. But inside, definitely the quality characteristics are one, the aroma comes right at you. You can smell the pouliche that started this loaf out hours ago. The random cell structure is a good sign. There are areas, particularly in here, you'll see some real glossy cell walls. That's a good sign that the fermentation was done well. Here's a really good looking glossy cell walls. That's called the translucency of the cell wall. And that indicates that everything was done in a good manner. The mixing wasn't too aggressive, which would make the loaf too tight. The fermentation was adequate so that we got some nice gassiness into it. And we had just the right amount of gluten network developed, which in our case was developed partially during the mix, but not excessively. And then we got more strength when we did that fold earlier. And then the final rise was good, the oven spring was good, and so we wind up getting some of those really thin, translucent cell walls. So those are all good quality characteristics for this baguette. Let's see how this one looks. Yeah. This one's even a little more open. There's still some areas that are a little bit on the tight side, but again, we like to judge things with a very critical eye, and we do it very, very often. Another thing that we want to look for would be the color of the crumb. Carotenoid pigments, which are flavor and aroma component of wheat flour, can get bleached out of a bread dough simply by overmixing it, which is why we tend to mix a little bit on the modest side and get more strength through folds. If you've preserved your carotenoids, you'll have a nice creamy crumb. If we look at the bread, the color of the crumb next to Martin's apron, the apron's white and you see the bread is anything but white. So we've got good color there. That's from using really good quality flour, King Arthur unbleached winter wheat flour, Sir Galahad, and also from respecting the requirements to get the best bread that we can possibly come up with.